Hello everyone, it's great to be back. I haven't posted anything new on my channel for about a month. I think there's a lot of things that came up, unfortunately, but I'm pleased to say that I'm putting a new video on. My last video didn't do that well. My Christian F video, unfortunately, for some reason, I don't know if it was the title or it was the fact that it was about Christian F, that it was that film review. It didn't do as well as I thought it might, but hey ho, you know, let's look to the future and perhaps this video will do better than the Christian F one. This video is going to be about Albert Speer's Mistress. Now, if any of you are into World War II history, or you're into Cold War history, I think he does some Cold War, but certainly World War II history. There's a great channel on the YouTube called Mark Felton. If you go on to Mark Felton's YouTube channel, you'll get to see him talk about this Albert Speer's Mistress, and he was trying to find out who she was, and he posted a video, and unfortunately he was unable to find out who she was. So because at every turn when he made inquiries into the archives, it would just draw a blank. It would just, you know, it was a sort of a road blockage, one after the other. So the inquiries that he made to the various libraries and archives, there was no information. And I mean, I have my own suspicions about this. So here's my book on Albert Speer, and it's by Gitta Sereny, and in it they talk about this mistress. Now, apparently the marriage, when he married his wife in 1928, by 1934 it was already on a rocky road. And then of course he did that 20 years in Spandau prison, but I don't think he was ever really close to his wife and to his six children. He came to the UK in 1973, and then he was, I believe he was invited back by the BBC to do an interview for the BBC in 1981. And this was the thing that really got me when I was watching Mark Felton's video on Albert Speer, was the fact that he looked, you know, of what you would expect a man of that age. I think he was in his 70s at that point. You know, sprightly, and he was able to, you know, there wasn't any, he didn't show any signs of fatigue or anything like that. But he was with his mistress. That was the other thing. So when he got to Heathrow, they kept him for 8 hours. Now that to me is really suspicious, you know, because I know that they've been doing this with Richard Medhurst, who's this journalist. He was kept, I don't know, maybe 24 hours or less than 24 hours. And then there was George Galloway and his wife, and they were kept at the airport for like 4 hours, something like that. And now George Galloway is now with his wife, now lives in exile as a result of these being detained by the authorities. So when I heard that, I never knew that. I never thought that, you know, Albert Speer, I mean, we all know that he should have hung at Nuremberg, and he got away with it. And he is was a war criminal. But to be held for 8 hours at the airport, that's ringing alarm bells for me. So anyway, he went to the BBC, he did his interview, he stayed at a hotel, but it was like a second-rate hotel. You know, somebody of his stature, you would think he would stay at. But the idea was, you know, not to draw attention on himself. And then during the course of, after the interview that he did, his mistress called the ambulance to come around because apparently he had a heart attack, and he was taken to St. Mary's Hospital. Now, and that's what perked up my interest, because as a young child, I was in St. Mary's Hospital, and St. Mary's Hospital was in Paddington, so London, for those of the United States who are watching this video. So I thought, oh really, gosh, yeah, you know, and that's where he was taken, and it was there that he was pronounced dead. And then ever since then, nobody knows who that mistress was that he had. You know, it's drawing a blank, and then Mark Felton would do his own investigating and making inquiries. He made the inquiries at the Metropolitan Police. He made inquiries at the BBC. He made inquiries at the I think it's called the Boarding. I think it's a Boarding Library. But there were various libraries that he made inquiries, and everywhere he drew a blank. They said, oh, we can't help you with our inquiries. Even MI5, he got in contact with MI5. They didn't even bother to respond. So that you know, made me suspicious, because I always knew those mysterious deaths of these Nazis. One was Heinrich Himmler, because he was held by the British. He died. Then Rudolf Hess, he died mysteriously. They said he committed suicide. I mean, you know, a 93-year-old man with arthritic hands trying to hang himself. And now with Albert Speer, the three suspicious deaths, all in by the British, you know, because I can't remember. I remember the Governor General's name at Spandau. John Letizia. He was the Governor General at Spandau. Now, if he knew that Rudolf Hess was assassinated, he could never tell anybody, because if he did, he would probably end up in prison, or he might himself end up dead. So he'll always say what the authorities will tell him to say, you know, just to save his neck. But these suspicious deaths, and I mean, I know it from the AfD in one of my other videos, those 7 MPs that suddenly died mysteriously before their local election, which is, I mean, the strangest and oddest thing I've ever heard. But anyway, I thought I'd bring it to your attention. But if you really want to get the details, I recommend that you go and you talk to, oh, beg your pardon, I misspoke, and that you watch Mark Felton's videos on this Albert Speer's mistress, and he will fill you in with all the details. So we got this is a book that I've showed before, Ian Cobain. It says The History Thieves. It says Secrets, Lies and the Shaping of Modern Nation. And it was through this book that I really got to see how secretive the British state really is, and how important files are. You know, if you have the documents, because documents are written at the time, and there's a massive great big paper trail. You'll have pages and pages and pages and pages of this stuff. And then, of course, it's trying to get access to them, because that's where the truth is. You'll get determined journalists, historians and activists, I would also include, who are desperate for these files because of the information that they contain. Now, the government, I think any government, likes to keep secrets, and there will be a lot of these documents that will either be shredded and incinerated and redacted, and will be kept in the archive for 100 years before anybody else will have access to them, which is an absolute tragedy in my estimation, and how things are deliberately kept away from the public's gaze. So The History Thieves, A Secret Lies and the Shaping of Modern Nation, and this is by Ian Cobain. This is a latest acquisition. This is called, excuse me, just have to put these other glasses on. I know it might look odd, but anyway. Survival over Service, How Institutions Manufacture Threats, Change Definitions and Reframe Reality. And here it says, Survival over Service uncovers the intelligence agencies across 5 countries spent 8 decades perfecting the same playbook, manufacture threats, redefine dissent as extremism, and weaponize the gap between institutional promises and institutional behaviour. Understanding the machinery is the first concept to escape in it. Grounded in primary sources, Survival over Service connects past operations to the systems shaping your world today and offers tools for protecting your cognitive autonomy in an environment built to erode it. And then it talks about the author, Stephen Schwen, I think, so S-V-E-H-N, Schwen, is a researcher specialising in the institutional analysis and intelligence history. His work rarely appeared on letterhead, but his fingerprints show up in the margins. Over time he grew less interested in official narratives and more tuned to the backstage mechanics. Sven writes with the precision of an analyst, the irreverence of someone who no longer bound by the institutional etiquette, and the grim clarity of a man who helped draft the memos he now decodes in public. This is a guided tour through the quiet machinery that shapes how threats are built, meanings are bent, and the reality is reframed by the very institutions trusted to protect us. And then I'll just finish off here. Okay, it says the claims in this book are grounded in declassified government archives, congressional testimony, court records, published investigative journalism, and the agency's own internal memoranda, where operations have been officially acknowledged through freedom of information releases, parliamentary inquiries, or post-reunification archive access. Primary sources are cited directly. Where official acknowledgement remains incomplete, the text draws on credible secondary sources, including peer-reviewed scholarship, award-winning journalism, and accounts from verified participants. So this is what Mark Felton was looking for. Was this is my latest acquisitions of documents, and how the 3-letter agencies and even the Stasi and the KGB and the CIA and all those, and how they operate. And they always keep sensitive information away from the public, and it's only through authors like this one, Sven, who have the determination and the audacity to look for these documents, for him to then go on to write his book. So this is one of those print-on-demand books. I'm getting quite a few of these. I mean, it's never my intention to collect these, but it doesn't matter as long as I have it in print form, in book form. I mean, there are books that I will probably can only get a digital copy, but that's perhaps down to its price as opposed to anything else. But anyway, yeah, this is one of my latest acquisitions, Survival over Service, and it's about these agencies like MI5 and the CIA and many others who have come up with these schemes and these projects to shape reality as we see them. Sort of it sort of creates this kind of a matrix, if you will. So you're never sure what reality is and what our culture is and what it all actually represents. But if you get yourself educated and you end up reading books like that, you will soon see the light and you will soon see what reality really looks like. So I thought I'd bring this book to your attention. Okay, so this one's called Neutralized, the FBI versus Gene Seberg. Now, Gene Seberg was in the civil rights movement, and that's her there. And she was in that famous film Breathless, which is the French New Wave movie directed by Jean-Luc Godard, and she'll be forever associated with that film. And she was asked by the CIA would she become an informant for them, and she said no. And she forever after that episode was spied on, had her telephones tapped, was followed. They would go break into her home and rearrange things so that she would become paranoid, and she was being smeared in the press simply because she believed in she was in the civil rights movement, and she donated money to the Black Panthers. And what happened, which was critical to her mental state, was the fact that it took its toll, and I believe she ended up committing suicide, which is a great tragedy. If you're a cinephile, you'll probably know who Gene Seberg is, and I mean, if you know Breathless, which is a bona fide classic, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about, because this is one of those great films. It was like a turning point in film history, and certainly in French film history. And what they did to her. Now, this is another one of those print-on-demand books, and it's kind of similar to this one in the sense that these are the techniques that they actually use to actually intimidate people. Each agency will have its own unique method of spying and tapping people's phones and rifling through their post and smearing them in the press, and various other techniques which are very damaging to one's mental health, and that you eventually at some point become paranoid. And I suspect it's got to a level now where it's very, very sophisticated and damaging to all those that are in some way either connected with it directly or indirectly, or being one of those that are being intimidated by these three-letter agencies. And clearly Gene Seberg was one of them, and it ended tragically with her taking her own life. So, Neutralized, the FBI versus Gene Seberg, and that the most famous film that she appeared in that made her name, and her legacy is Breathless, directed by Jean-Luc Godard. This is another book I got here. I don't know. Well, I just thought I'd bring it because again, it's. I just bought this new book, and this is a book on Boris Becker. It's called Inside. It's when he was actually in prison. Now, I'm not a big fan of tennis. You know, I'll watch Wimbledon from time to time. You know, I'm not really a big tennis fan, but Boris Becker, him being German, I'd heard in the news that he had to do time behind the door, and how he got into that position, I'm not sure, because this book is brand new. I've only just got it, so I haven't had the chance to read it. But certainly with these books that are, sports men and women, celebrities, entertainers, musicians, rock stars, politicians, even royalty, because they're in the public eye, they're in a lot of ways have something to say because of who they are. It's not like ordinary folk or somebody from the working class, unless they have a good story to tell. You wouldn't, if they were to bring out a book, you probably wouldn't want to read it. But because you've got someone like Boris Becker, and people will know who Boris Becker is, that will intrigue you. It certainly intrigued me as to me wanting to buy this book, and actually reading about what it was and why it was that he ended up in prison in England. Now, I do know that there was, after a certain, I don't know if it was years or months that he served, that he was able to be released. But the thing was, he had to leave the country. He was obliged to leave the country immediately. He couldn't stay in the UK, and that meant, if you're like a commentator, I think he was a commentator at Wimbledon, and that's a loss of an income stream. So whatever it was that he did, that ended up for him to be put into prison, clearly was quite serious. But how damaging it also could be to your career, and for you to earn a living. So, but yeah, Boris Becker, I don't really know much about him. I only know that he was a great tennis player, and the fact that he won Wimbledon at 17 must have been a massive burden, because everybody wants to know who you are, and everybody heaps praise upon you, but then that must add extra pressure on you to have to win every time when you can't win, or certainly if you have an off game, or you have an injury that you're carrying with you, even though you probably be better off being out of the sport long enough for that injury to heal properly, and yet you're obliged to play because contractual obligations, or as a consequence of contracts that you've signed with an agency, or with marketers, or whatever, to market a particular product or something like that. And then you say, okay, I play, and you're not on top of your game because you're carrying this injury. So there are lots of things. And the other thing he mentioned, I think, was his knees, because of the running around the court. It can have a damaging and profound effect on the knees and on the ankles and feet. So it will be really interesting to read and to look into his life, because it's him that's telling the story as opposed to somebody else writing on his behalf, or it could be an unauthorized biography. So that's all I have to show you today. I wish you all well. I hope you had a happy Easter, and that you I do recommend, as I say, I do recommend that you watch that Mark Feltham video on Albert Speer's Mistress, because that was the one that actually inspired me to actually make a video today. So, auf Wiedersehen, alles Gute und bitte fall nicht nieder.